Hello, this is Professor Tom Wolf. Again, we're working with Java Swing graphical user interfaces. In the last video, we created the GUI for a quoter, which would show a series of quotes. Has the VCR-like controls, so first, last, next, previous, and a quit. These are all buttons. And basically, in the last video, I got the GUI going, but I didn't have the code hooked up. So I'm just going to go over the rest of the code with you. I had a kind of funny event here, which I'll share with you. So I went through and I was recording the video on this, and then when I went to run the application, it wasn't running correctly. And it turned out the reason it wasn't running correctly is I was running the old version here with the green button instead of running the one that I wanted here. So basically, if we look at this class, we can see that there's a variable in here, current quote dex, which is really a state variable. And so essentially the state of the quote object is which quote is shown. And all of the controls affect that. So if you go next, that increases the quote index. If you go previous, that decreases. If you go first, it sets it to 0. If you go last, it sets it to the index of the last element in the quote array list. So because of that, we want to have a master function that we can use in our event handlers. And I've written that. It's called update display. And basically what I did is I coded this to wrap around. So if the user hits next and they're on the last quote, then this number is now out of range and it's too big. So we wrap it around and set it to 0, which is the first quote. Similarly, if they go the other way and the quote dex is less than 0 because they were on the first quote and they pushed previous, it'll go to the last quote. And then here's the code that actually sets the value for the GUI. So we have the two text fields, quote and author text field. We use the set text method, and then notice this, quotes.get current quote dex dot get quote text and get author text. So that gets the quote text and the author text from the current quote. So each one of our action listeners is going to use that. Okay, now here where we created the control panel, this is where we add the action listeners in. And this is where the Lambda expressions really shine with this functional programming. So this is really excellent. It's very short. So here on the first button, I have first button dot add action listener, and then here's my Lambda expression for the action listener. And that basically specifies that it's going to take a parameter of an action event, which is called AE. And then over here, this is the arrow that indicates that this is the code body that goes with it. So when the user hits the first button, we set the current quote dex to 0, and then we call our update display to display the quote. When the user hits the previous button, we set the current quote dex, sorry, we decrement it, we decrease it by 1, and then we call the update display. And again, the update display handles if this went over or under, right? Similarly, next quote we increase, last quote we set it to the last index, and then the quit button, you've seen this before, the Lambda expression for that is just system exit. Okay, now just look at this for a second. If what you really have to implement to add to do the action listener is you have to implement the action performed method. Well, recall that the action performed takes an action event a parameter. This doesn't matter what you call it, but AE is fine. And then in the body, you do whatever you're going to do. So this is, in fact, an action perform method. And with Java 8, the compiler can recognize that this is the implementation of the action listener class. So this whole thing right here that I've highlighted is essentially an action listener. Okay, now that I've got this figured out, that I'm running the right code, I'll come on over here and we'll run our viewer, run file. And now when I push one of the buttons, I get the quote. So eat my shorts, that's the last quote. Again, if I go to the next, it'll go to the first one. If I go back, it'll go to the last one. There's the first one again. I go back, and you can see then that I can go through all of my quotes, okay? And then my quit button works fine too. So there you go. It's kind of funny. I spent 20 minutes trying to run the wrong file. So that's one thing I warn you about when you have multiple projects open. And you see how this project 7A is in bold? That's because it's set to be the current project. That's the one that gets run when I do that. So really what I want to do if I want to use the green arrow is I want to set this as the main project. And now when I run it, it'll run the main there. So quote viewer. And then again, okay. All right, now since we have some time, I didn't figure this out yet. I'm going to just code this on the fly. But really, we wanted to show a quote at startup, right? So if we go back in here to the constructor, the simple way to do that is just to call the update display method, and that'll always show the first quote because the quote dext is set to 0 when we load the quotes. So in the constructor, I'm going to go ahead and do that right here. Now, I'm kind of curious about if this will work or not because I'm basically setting it before I display. Oh, okay, wait a second. We definitely don't want to do it after adding the panel. So let's go ahead and get rid of some of this white space. Okay, so let's put that here. So update display should work now because the entire GUI is built, although it's not set visible until we do that in the main method. Okay, now that I've reset this, I can go ahead and run it from here. And I should see a quote from the very beginning. There it is. So that's the first quote. And you can see it goes through all of the quotes. There's the first one again. I can go to the last quote. I can go back to the first. And I can page through here. And then I can quit. All right. So there we go. That's a pretty nice little application. We learned some more about the layouts. And I got to tell you, I'm loving this Java 8. These Lambda expressions are easy to read, and because they're just so sparse, it makes the code itself a lot easier to read. I mean, think about it. If I had an anonymous inner class here for the action listener, I'd have 6 or 7 lines of code for each one of these, and it'd be much harder to read the code. So this is a great thing. Okay, hope you're enjoying things here, and code on, dudes.